Welcome back to a mental health break with Vincent A. Lanci. I'm Vincent A. Lanci, speaker, coach, and author of the book Left for Dead, A Story of Redemption.
And I'm Eric Christiansen, filmmaker.
When I was 21 years old, I was the victim of a hit-and-run accident while walking home from a friend's birthday. After coming out of a coma and suffering from a traumatic brain injury, or you may know of as a TBI, I soon realized that it was time to put my mental health on a very high pedestal. This transformative experience has led me to create a podcast that is all things mental health. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate the show 5 stars and continue listening by subscribing. Would it benefit you to hear from mental health professionals and influencers? Would it add value to your life to hear mental health advocates share their authentic stories and talk about their mental health, the issues they face, and how they actively combat them? If you answered yes to any of those questions, you came to the right place. I want to start by congratulating you for making your mental health a priority. For today's episode, I am happy to introduce my guest, Eric Christiansen. He is an acclaimed filmmaker and documentarian who has built his brand around socially responsible filmmaking that educates, inspires, and heals. Eric explores the impact of trauma, the resilience of the human spirit, and how a powerful platform for hope can be built to help trauma survivors begin the vigilant journey of healing. A trauma survivor himself, Christiansen worked through the loss of his home and possessions in the PaintedCave Fire by creating his first film, Faces in the Fire, 25 years ago. All of his films have been transformative in the recovery process for thousands of people whose lives have been compromised mentally, spiritually, and physically by trauma. Eric Christiansen has won several awards for his life-changing work, including a 7-time Southwestern Region Emmy Award recipient, an International Monitor Award winner for Best Director, and a Silver and a Gold Award winner from the Houston International Film Festival. Allow me to now introduce Eric Christiansen. Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, Vincent, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and I'm excited for our conversation.
Me as well. Would you mind please introducing yourself to our listeners a little further before we dive in and get going? And also, please do share your role relating to mental health.
Oh, my name is Eric Christiansen, and I'm a filmmaker, but I'm not 100% comfortable with the title filmmaker because my work has expanded more into really healing work and as a messenger. And briefly, over about 30 years ago, I lost my home in the PaintedCave Fire disaster in Santa Barbara, California, and I didn't know it at the time, but it was a huge opportunity and a big turning point for me. But at the time, it was the worst, it was the worst disaster in my life. And I'd lost everything, all the material things in life. But what happened is I was able to take that next 7 months, and it was a very, very difficult 7 months, and reevaluate everything. And I was able to, with the help of my higher power, I was able to turn things around, get into recovery from drugs and alcohol, and then actually get a little perspective on the disaster and see it for what it was. It was an opportunity to wipe my slate clean. And naively, I've been in the industry for longer than 30 years. I've been an editor and working in film since I was about 12 professionally. And I was able to take my experience of going through that disaster, and naively I said, I think I'll make a documentary about this. I was mainly an editor at the time, and I just launched out on my first independent film, and I made a film about the recovery following the PaintedCave Fire disaster. And we premiered it a year later for the community in Santa Barbara, California. We were supported by the American Red Cross. We had counselors there, and it was quite the thing. And it turned out to be a beautiful film, and it went on to win my first Emmy Award. But not only did it win my first Emmy Award, but it won the attention of the National Institute of Mental Health, and they picked it up and put it in their catalog as a healing tool and a resource for their counselors. When they come into a situation in a disaster, they get lay people and various clinicians in the area to help debrief all the fire, I use that as an example, all the disaster survivors, and they use that film as a tool to teach them how to work with survivors. So that was actually an eye-opener for me. And seeing the healing surrounding the film and being able to do what I love to do, it really became my calling. So since then, I'm on my 4th film now, and it's become my calling. And that's what I do. I do films about trauma recovery, and going a little bit deeper about grief recovery.
Well, thank you so much for joining the show again and sharing your story. I know how many people it's going to help. This is a great perspective I'm able to bring, and I try to create different perspectives for all of our listeners. And now you're giving this great viewpoint from documenting traumas. And before the show, Eric and I were talking and have similarities between traumatic brain injuries that he's found working with TBI survivors and now speaking with me. It's going to have a lot of value today. So Eric, thank you for sharing all that. On each episode, I share the mental health story of someone who is famous because I want to let you, the listeners, know you are not alone. I want you to understand that even though someone looks like they are healthy from the outside, they may not be on the inside too. For today's episode, I will now introduce the mental health-related story of Trevor Noah. Noah is typically one viewed as happy and cheerful per his role as host of the hit show, The Daily Show. He does use his platform to raise awareness around important issues, including the issue of why Black people and other people of color have a tough time seeking out therapy. He has also been public about his personal bout with depression. He uses it as leverage as a celebrity to speak honestly about what normally goes unspoken and unsaid. I think this article is another great example of not everyone who seems happy is happy, and it is a surprise that an extraordinarily funny man and smart man also struggles with depression. It shouldn't be. Noah reminds us that you never know what someone can be going through by just judging a book by its cover. And I'd like to end this right up with a quote where he said, "Disparities continue," makes it sound clinical, impersonal. But what that means is that unless you're white and middle class, it's still extremely hard to find a therapist who is likely to get you and understand where you're coming from. That's the worst. It's deeply painful to acknowledge you need help and seek it out just to come up empty or invalidated. Eric, what do you take away from that story?
There's 2 different things that I come away with that. The first thing on that last quote, I have to say, I work with dozens and dozens of trauma survivors and other people that have mental health situations. And one of the toughest things is asking help. And then once you ask for help, the next toughest thing is finding that connection, that really special connection where you feel comfortable enough to literally take your mask off and then become real and become vulnerable. And so the second thing that I'm touching on here is unmasking hope. That's the current film I'm working on. And one of the basic precepts of the whole film is taking off that mask. And, as a TV personality that he is, he has his different masks. And one of it, and sometimes the masks work for us.
Yeah.
And we have the mask of the professional. We go to work. We have the mask of being happy. And we have these different masks that we wear. But behind that mask, there's so many different layers. And it just, and especially with the trauma survivors, you take that mask off, and that's what the real person, the core is. And I really feel that the masks work at the very beginning. And they continue to work if you use them for what they are, to be able to go to work, to be able to do certain things. But these masks can get stuck on us, and they can start to overtake us, and they can start to show up as kind of ugly things: workaholism, alcoholism, physical abuse, things like that. And we hide behind this mask, and it becomes unhealthy. And it's about taking off that mask. It's about finding and asking for help and finding that person you can open up with, taking that mask off, getting real, getting to the truth of the core of what's going on with you. And then the healing can start, and that mask kind of melts away. and we get to become who we are. So
I'm looking forward
that's a
to
great
seeing this
piece.
film, Eric. I think this is very powerful. Is this the film you're finishing up right now that we spoke about?
Exactly. Yes, it's called Unmasking Hope, and it looks like we have a premiere date going for public television on 9/11/21, 2021.
Well, you have to keep me in the loop so I can keep all of the listeners in the loop as well. I think that's a great time to get into the main event now, Eric. On each episode, my guest and I go over this series of 6 questions, which only slightly varies depending on if the guest is speaking on their own or others' mental health. You ready to go?
Yes, definitely.
Great. So many would agree that the more common or at least talked about types of mental disparities are mood disorders, anxiety disorders, or schizophrenia disorders. Which areas do you come across the most?
With what I'm doing and in my work, I come across a lot of anxiety, and the trauma produces just that. That is one of the main byproducts of being exposed to severe trauma is anxiety and then depression. And so that those are two things that I come across a lot. And the anxiety so many times manifests itself in another kind of byproduct is isolation. And right now with the COVID and everything going on, when the
Yeah.
prescription for the COVID is isolation, it goes against what a lot of us in the mental health world and a lot of people with situations really need is we don't need isolation. We need to connect. And that's one of the challenges that we're facing right now with people in recovery.
Yeah, you couldn't be more right. This COVID situation has a lot of negative detriments for the mental health world. As I shared with you, that was one of my main motivators in creating Mr. Lanci Talks Mental Health, is because there is so much information that people don't have that is readily available. So my goal in putting that all together is to help people thrive once again. And as far as COVID, you think about the OCD people as well, Eric, where they have to wash their hands a million times, and now they really may feel everything is COVID. So it is truly horrible.
Yeah, it's such a timely topic, and I'm so excited for you with that to get the word out because, and it goes back to trauma. We're in the middle of a very traumatic time. Some may look at it as low level trauma, or maybe not. Some people it impacts more, but as a society, we're going through a lot of trauma, a collective trauma with this. And one of the first things we do during trauma is it's not really happening. We're in denial, and we move away from that
That's the truth. Yeah.
of what's really going on. And I see that time and time again. And with me personally, when the fire came, it's not gonna, we're all good. Everything's good. And I think being in the middle of COVID, we're in a collective, a lot of us, even me, when I'm like, I have to put my mask on again. What the heck? And it's like, is this really happening? And so where I'm pointing towards is to make the individuals avail themselves to the help that you're putting out and all the resources. There's a lot of resources out there, and you may be in denial that it's affecting you, but it's very real right now, and it affects us on so many different ways.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that perspective, Eric. Thank you. So you may have mentioned it before. You had this terrible fire, but you've also been involved in movies since you were 12 years old. When did you first decide that the career relating to mental health, or at least taking a stance to break down some mental health stigmas like you're doing, was the right path for you?
As I mentioned at the premiere of Faces in the Fire, and I saw so much positive change around that film.
Mhm.
I saw the people that were actually in the film being able to tell their story, being able to validate their experience, and then this, all of a sudden this peak of healing that comes from the validation of that your story matters to other people.
Yep.
And then secondarily, with the individuals in the film, once the film gets out there, they're all of a sudden realizing other people are connecting through identification with their story. And then again, they get this secondary validation that my story is important, but I'm not only that, but I'm of service to others, because now they see my story, they hear my story. And we talked about this, the importance of telling our stories. And once that importance is that other people can connect to it, and they can say, hey, I'm not alone. And look, this person's on this path to healing. So after that, and the change I had personally, spiritually, from working with these people, that it was a done deal. It's funny. How did I choose? I don't feel like I chose. It kind of called me. I feel all the way from second grade, when I made my first movie, I had this feeling when I was 8 years old or 7 years old that I had some sort of message. And it took up until June 27th, 1990 was the catalyst of when I started to learn what that message was. But I had to go through the path similar to you to get there. And it was a bumpy path.
Well, I love how you say that right there. You have to really go through the journey sometimes, and you come out on the right side at the end. But Eric, through your experiences here, what advice can you give to everybody listening on as to what may be considered a potential early sign that they may be developing some form of mental disparity, that they might need to be paying a little more attention to their mental health?
I'm not a professional, but from my personal experience,
Yes.
at my own process, and then also seeing so many others, the signs of some sort of mental disparity, it's a loss of interest in what you used to connect with, that what you used to love. It's a major personality change. It's
Like that.
it's
Mm-hmm.
loss of sleep. It's obsessive thoughts, crazy thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
or replaying something again and again with trauma survivors. And it's a very real thing. It's people that haven't had anything like that happen to them go, well, it's just, can't you just turn that off? It's just craziness. Well, it's not. Our mind is much deeper than what we know. And it's a very difficult organ to get a handle on, I guess you would say,
It's a great way to
because
put
it's
it.
so deep
Yeah.
and operates on so many levels. And these obsessive thoughts and these like OCD type
Mm-hmm.
of behaviors, and the list goes on and on, and then there we are again, like we said, we're in a position where we have to identify this and ask for help, and that's a tough thing.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your perspective there. I enjoy having mental health advocates on the show as well as doctors, because it provides two different viewpoints of some things you may be experiencing. But again, through your experiences, Eric, if you could pick three, and I say only three because I want the three most important things our listeners can do on a daily or short-term basis to improve their mental health, what advice can you offer from your experiences personally, directing? You have a few great perspectives to share.
And again, it's through my personal experience, and it's also through the successes I see in the people I work with.
Exactly. Yes.
What comes to mind, one thing right away, is I think about J.R. Franklin, and you're like, who's J.R. Franklin? Well, he was in my film Homecoming: A Vietnam Vet's Journey, and then he also had a part in Searching for Home Coming Back from War. He's a Vietnam veteran, and with that has severe PTSD. But it's quite arrested in his case, and one of the reasons is, three of them, is he has a spiritual practice. He has his, and it could be anything, it doesn't, we're not narrowing anything down there, but he has some sort of spiritual practice where he comes in connection with something bigger than him.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be anything, and that's a big part of it. He also has a physical practice, keeping himself in good shape. I mean, the guy is 76 or something, and he could kick my butt.
Well, I agree with both of those for sure, because if I go a few days, I have my own health issues, non-COVID related, but I don't do tremendous squatting or things. But if I don't do 30 minutes of ab workouts or take a walk, I don't think the same. My thought process is not where I want it to be.
It's funny because he's from Kansas, and he's a Kansas farm boy, born and bred, and he doesn't really like to work out, but he likes to work hard. And so he's lifting crap, he's building sheds, he's digging holes. It's insane. You go over to see him and he's like, you're following him while he's like doing all this stuff, and but those are two things. And then I think one of the main things, and it kind of bridges into I think the next part, one of the main things is connection, and having a connection with somebody else, preferably that has a similar path as you, so they can understand. They don't think you're coming from a crazy place. They can go, oh, me too. Mm-hmm. And hopefully they're a little bit further ahead on the spirit, on that healing path. And I think that is invaluable. And it's invaluable to me still to this day. I have my mentor, and I sit with them and I allow them to speak into me.
I'm huge on coaches, mentors, support system. In graduate school, they give you the option to have a career coach. It's not mandatory. You have the ability. So I connected with one. Rod Buchan is his name. He's in Texas and Florida mainly. And we're still in touch today, talking, bouncing ideas off each other. It created an incredible bond, to be honest. And I thank the University of Tampa for that. But also supportive friends, and being supportive is a part of my next book, in Mr. Lanci Talks Mental Health, where it's not only enough to be supportive of others, you got to be supportive of yourself too, and have supportive people around you.
Oh my gosh. And that's somebody that we forget a lot.
It's huge. Everybody's so hard. So hard on yourself all the time, but you have to give yourself the slack sometimes, and I'm guilty of it. We all are at certain times where we need to cut ourselves some slack, and I think that's a very important thought to redistribute to people, especially in times like this. So that's why it did find a place in my book. But those are amazing short-term initiatives based on actual experience that you went through, witnessed from your friends and colleagues. What are two longer-term commitments our listeners can make to create a healthier mindset?
Well, let's go back to the main one is, that connection with somebody else, and a connection with a group. Mm-hmm. And being in a like-minded crowd of people similar to yourself. And I think, for me, in my recovery from drugs and alcohol, there's nothing that can replace that. We're having to do it through Zoom now, and I loved physical meetings. Mm-hmm. I love going to my meetings, and it is long-term. I've been doing it now for 29 years. Clean and sober, and going to meetings and meeting with other guys, preferably for me, man to man. Mm-hmm. I like mixed meetings will work, but going back to the dynamic of the meeting, you're with a group of people that are like-minded, that we've been on the same ship. Yep. And sometimes it was a sinking ship and we all survived. and there's always they say, there's a nut for every bolt in the room, It's like you look in there and there's somebody that you can always, and it's hard to find community, but community is very, very important. And especially right now, going back to the COVID and what you're talking about, our transition for our meetings to Zoom was a little bit rocky at first, but now, I'm seeing guys that I got sober with, but they've moved away, but they're in my meeting. And how cool is that? You're still sober? And that's like this whole crazy, Arizona, New York, what's Abu Dhabi? I'm like, dude, I haven't seen you. Yeah, I'm sober in Abu Dhabi. And then this is what I'm doing. And it's like, wow. And so it's once I've gotten over the Zoom thing and not being in the physical room with them, it's become a really neat thing, and again, it's talking about what you're talking about, resources for COVID, and how are we going to work around this? How am I going to continue my personal growth? So I only kind of have one big thing long-term is staying in that group.
I think that's incredible.
I guess secondary is having that mentor and taking the time to cultivate a relationship, because it takes years for somebody to really understand you.
Yeah, I like the way you put that here. It's becoming a theme where be around people who get it, who can help you thrive. As an entrepreneur, I'm really one of the only, and from my main group of high school and college, there aren't too many entrepreneurs. So things for me don't make sense to other people, where things like social media, for example, this is my business. This isn't a personal page. This is how I'm trying to grow my brand. So when someone likes my picture or comments my picture, you're supporting my business for free. And other people may just see scrolling, but and the long days, the long hours, people go 9 to 5. They're done. 5 o'clock Friday, their emails off, their phones off. Most likely for me, I'm waking up at 3 o'clock on Saturday in the morning, and I'm continuing my regimen. And whatever day I choose for my mental health day, that will be the only variance. But it's tough to find like-minded people. So this platform, this podcast, the entrepreneurial one, the mental health one, I'm connecting with like-minded people on 2 topics very dear to me. So I'm trying to keep this going as long as it stays valuable and relevant.
You know what's really interesting is, not that I was thinking when you were talking about that is I have mentors in all the different areas. I have I don't want to call him my old mentor, but I have a mentor that taught me about filmmaking, Robert Sleesha, and we were just on the Zoom and we're planning another one. And I just texted, I'm a documentary filmmaker, but I have another job, and I run a real estate team with my wife. We have a real estate team. And I was just texting one of my coaches for real estate that we just sold a house today through his system that he's been coaching us on. And I'm like, Robbie, guess what? So, it's like, gosh, it's so important. I guess I have, in every area of our life, right?
Well, it's beautiful advice you're giving, because it just shows firsthand experience here. This is something that can work for you. Everybody is different. What works for some does not work for everyone. But this is something me and him can both say works well for both of us. But Eric, what are some ways you're going to continue to what are some ways you're going to raise awareness for the importance of mental health in the future?
Well, we were talking before the show. I'm 90% done with Unmasking Hope. We are working on finishing funds right now, and you can go to unmaskinghopethemovie.com, and there is a place where you can donate. We have a 501c3 umbrella through the International Documentary Association, and but I am finishing that film, and that's my main goal right now. And it's, I tell my wife once this is done, then maybe I'll do something. And she just laughs, because it is my calling. Something else will land in my lap, and then soon I'll be doing another film. So,
well, I love the motivation
the main
there.
thing I'm doing right now is finishing that film and wrapping that up, doing the fundraising. But the exciting part is coming with the post-production and putting all, I'm looking back over here at my board. We have about 11 different survivors of various traumas. And it's such a journey and exciting thing to interlap all their stories and put them into that final film. And I'm excited to revisit that and put it together.
Well, you're definitely going to have to keep me in the loop here, Eric. And thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know the listeners are going to see all the value in your show. I love how you spoke from the heart, spoke about the fire, but you also spoke about how, okay, you knew you loved directing, you loved movies, you had this message, but it took until that moment for you to clarify things, and look at the tremendous difference that you're making. I loved the initiatives where you really highlighted human-to-human connection, finding like-minded individuals, because they have an idea of what you've gone through. They can help you propel through anything. But it is time for the last word. And I also do this on my other podcast series, what it's really like to be an entrepreneur too, because I want the listeners to really get to know the guests I bring on. Is there something that you would like to share with the listeners that we did not get to touch on yet today?
The main thing I'd like to share is just empathy. I think right now, if there's a word that means something that's super important, is empathy. And empathy is not just sympathy or an outside kind of, empathy is taking a chance. Empathy is putting yourself really in somebody else's perspective. And I think so many things could be, I don't want to say solved, but so many things could be sanded down, the hard edges.
That's a good way to put
these things. If we just took a little bit more time to try to understand the other viewpoint, and not make snap judgments and not join the red or the blue side. It's not like that. There is so many shades of colors in between those two if you look at the spectrum. And so it's opening up your mind, seeing somebody else's point of view, and then being able to be a big enough person to say, wow, that is kind of a difficult position they're in. And whereas I can't fully relate, I can kind of understand. And I'm not too sure, how I feel about this, but I'm somewhere in the middle, and that's okay. Because then you're open and your heart's working. That's kind of my last word, is like empathy, and open up your mind and take the time. And that's what I try to do with my films. I try to put people up on the screen so people can connect with them, understand their point of view. Oh, he's just a crazy guy from the war with PTSD. No, he's a human. He's somebody's son. He's somebody's dad. He's somebody's best friend. Take that time to realize that. And I think things won't be solved, but at least the hard edges would be sanded down. So that's my last words.
It's a beautiful message, Eric. Thank you for that. Would you mind now please sharing your professional social media, the website, ways for our listeners to follow your endeavors, request your services?
I would love to. Thanks, Vincent. If you want to find out more about me personally and hear our podcasts, you can go to ecproductions.com, and that's my personal website. And if you want to find out more about my current film, you can go to Unmasking Hope. That's unmaskinghopethemovie.com, and read about all the survivors that we have in there. We have them all 11 listed, and it's just, they're beautiful people, amazing souls. Look at our crew, the clinicians that we have attached to it. And then if you feel motivated, donate a little bit of money so we can finish this thing and get it on public television. So thank you.
Absolutely. Everybody be sure to check out that great content, learn a little bit more about that movie. And it is social media time for the show, and we're on whichever platform you like to use. We're at A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci on LinkedIn, at A Mental Health Break on Instagram and Facebook, and over on Twitter, we're Podcast by Lanci, so you get updates from this show and what it's really like to be an entrepreneur. Of course, my handles are at Vincent A. Lanci on all social media and YouTube, and my website is vincentalanci.com. If you check out my books, DM me. I'd love to hear from you. We have Left for Dead, A Story of Redemption, and How to Transform Your Mindset When the Norm is Changed. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please do continue listening and rate A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci 5 stars. I work hard to find value delivering guests for you